One of the biggest questions for the Chicago Bulls this offseason is, are they going to sign DeMar DeRozan, or are they going to let him walk in free agency? There is a report that DeMar DeRozan might be one of the 5 riskiest big money free agents in all the NBA. We're going to be talking about what this means for DeMar DeRozan and what this means for the Chicago Bulls. This is Rico Greenhowe. I'm your host, and this is another episode of Bulls Digest. Before we jump into it, I wanted to let you know that 84.7% of you guys that watch the video are not actually subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with the latest news and happenings around your Chicago Bulls. Without further ado, let's jump into the first part of this video, which is DeRozan risky free agent with the question mark. This comes on the heels of a Bleacher Report written by Greg Swartz, and he's talking about 5 players that would possibly be really risky, for how much money that you would actually spend on them. On those 5, or on that list, you have DeMar DeRozan, you have Pascal Siakam, you have James Harden, and then you also too have Paul George. And so those are the other players listed with DeMar DeRozan. So this is what Greg Swartz had to say about DeMar DeRozan in this particular piece. And so he writes, the Chicago Bulls have some cutthroat decisions to make this summer. Rumors have indicated their willingness to pay DeMar DeRozan in free agency, but that comes with risk. Greg Swartz of Bleacher Report listed DeMar DeRozan among the riskiest big money free agents of the offseason. It's fair to question whether DeRozan stands on a championship level team. Though Swartz wrote, he sets to turn 35 this summer and clearly isn't a number 1 option. Even being a number 2 looks like a bit of a stretch. Could a Jokic and DeRozan combo win a title? Leaving us to consider DeRozan a solid number 3 option. How many teams would be willing to match the Bulls' offer of $40 million a year for their 3rd best player? DeRozan returning to the Bulls doesn't make sense for his own championship aspirations. Pending some drastic changes around him for someone entering his 16th season, but with just 1 conference finals appearance thus far, winning a title has to be at the top of his list. This isn't going to happen in Chicago anytime soon. Exploring a sign and trade option to a contender may be what's best for all involved here, especially if DeRozan will accept an annual salary closer to $30 million a year. All right, guys, and so that is pretty telling here by Greg Swartz. He talks about the fact that, yes, there is absolutely some interest in DeMar DeRozan. It's reported that the Chicago Bulls have offered him, I think, a 2-year, close to $40 million a year, something like that. So $80 million right now for the 2 years. And then also too, they're talking about the fact that he mentions, I think he's talking about Jokic and he's talking about DeMar, and he's asking hey, could a combo like that possibly win a chip? And so he's actually putting it out there and saying, hey, can DeMar DeRozan even be a good fit there? And will people actually want to pay that much money for a guy that could be your, possibly 3rd option on the team? And I am really a huge believer in DeMar DeRozan. I think that he brings up a great piece here that DeMar DeRozan has been to a conference final. I feel like that experience has helped out Kobe White, and it has also helped out DeSumo as well. And I think that this is huge for the Chicago Bulls as far as building a winning culture. So I think that, yes, I think that DeMar DeRozan should be back with the Chicago Bulls. And I had to dig a little bit deeper into the numbers and also to look at what some other reporters are saying about his pending free agency, guys. And I think that this is a bit more telling about how important DeMar DeRozan is and how solid that DeMar DeRozan is. So this is something that I found here in USA Today, and it's just highlighting some free agents that are possibly coming up. And here's what it had to say about DeMar DeRozan. So it says that he's still dropping tough buckets all over the mid-range area, arguably as well as any mid-range scorer in the league. game should age well as he no longer relies so much on his athleticism, but more on his footwork and shot making. His 23-24 stats, 22.7 points per game, 4.1 rebounds a game, 5.2 assists per game, 47.2 as far as the field goal percentage, and 33.3% from the three-point land. And, obviously it talks about him being a mid-range maestro here. He is not so much a three-point shooter. But look, bottom line, guys, is, I think that this shows you that is it really a risky signing if DeMar DeRozan doesn't use his athleticism like a lot of players do in the league. I think that this makes him less of a risk. I think that this makes him more of a solid signing in free agency. Now, the money aspect, I'm not sure if that is right. The 2 years kind of fits, I think, on the timeline of what the Chicago Bulls want to do. This kind of reminds me of something that's similar to what they did with Dwayne Wade. Obviously, they didn't pay Dwayne Wade as much, but essentially what they did is they had a 2-year deal in place, and Dwayne Wade only saw a year of that before they eventually waived him, and he only played 66 games. The one thing that I will say is that, Dwayne Wade played with a lot more athleticism, okay? It was a lot more attacking the basket. It was a lot more of the, herky-jerky kind of crossover and stuff like that. Like, DeMar DeRozan is not that type of player. He's a guy that gets to his spot and then he rises up and he scores. And the one thing that I do like about this is, as you saw here, is that he is a willing passer as well. So, as DeMar DeRozan is cooking, he can go ahead and pass it. He is not a guy that you pass it to and then he's just going to throw up wild shots and things like that. I mean, it's not like he's coming down and jacking up three-point shots, guys, that have long rebounds and lead to, fast breaks where you don't have a set defense. So I like the fact that you can actually have this guy in the half court and he can be a closer for you. So I love that about him. And, arguably speaking, guys, Klay Thompson's on this list, James Harden's on this list, and Paul George is on this list, along with Pascal Siakam. And I will argue that DeMar DeRozan really shouldn't be on this list. I can think of 2 other players that certainly should be on this list that are not even mentioned on here. So, one of those players would be, for me, it's going to be D'Angelo Russell. Okay, D'Angelo Russell is a guy that literally, he can go out here and he can score 20, 30 points and have assists and everything else. But then there's times that he literally will put up a goose egg. So you're telling me that you would be willing to sign big money for a guy that essentially doesn't necessarily have it every single game, and then when you get to the playoffs, you don't know what you're going to get from him? Look at what has happened with the Lakers situation. So at least with DeMar DeRozan, I know what I'm going to get on a consistent basis every night, and I also know what I'm going to get from him in the playoffs as well, because DeMar DeRozan has been there. Another guy too that I could throw on this list to you guys is going to be, Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris is another guy that I think should be thrown on this list instead of DeMar. Look, Tobias Harris is literally gone out there, and I think just this playoff series alone has thrown up like 5 points. He got outscored by Kyle Lowry, who I think is close to 40 years old, if I'm not mistaken. And not to throw any shade at Kyle Lowry, but dude, he scored more points than him. And here's a guy that he's set to make big money in free agency somewhere. So look, these are 2 players that I can see right now clearly that need to be on the list other than DeMar DeRozan. I think that DeMar DeRozan is a constant and a consistent player that if there are other pieces in place, DeMar DeRozan is an excellent signing. Like, take for instance, I'm just going to throw a scenario out there, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but this guy mentioned something hypothetical, like if DeMar DeRozan were on the Nuggets. Okay, that may necessarily or not necessarily be a good fit, but if you were to throw him on, say, like a team like the Timberwolves right now, can you imagine if he was in the starting lineup with a guy like you got Anthony Edwards, you got Gobert, and you got Towns out there as well. Can you imagine what would happen if you have a situation where Anthony Edwards is not able to score? They have another source of offense, guys, and he doesn't demand the ball. He's a closer. You need a closer on your roster. And I mean, I get it that you can argue that maybe the Chicago Bulls is not the best situation for him. And I understand that he wants to be a Chicago Bull, which I love that. But it's mainly going to depend on what they're going to place around him this summer. Look, if the Chicago Bulls go out here and they get rid of Lavine and they go out here and they get some serviceable pieces around DeMar and this young backcourt, we could be singing another tune about DeMar DeRozan and the Chicago Bulls. And so that's the real big question for me. It's not DeMar DeRozan being a risky signing, because I don't think he's going to be a risky signing, and I think he should be back with the Chicago Bulls at the right price and the right amount of years. We obviously can't lock up a lot of years into DeMar DeRozan as he's getting ready to age, because we don't know what's going to happen to him. Although I do like my chances with DeMar DeRozan because I think that he does take care of himself. He's shown that he will play in 90% of his game. So I think that this is a good investment for any team out there. So let me know what you guys think in the comments as I've rambled on here, guys. Do you think that DeMar DeRozan is a risky sign for any team in the NBA? Do you think it's a risky sign for the Chicago Bulls? Should they go a different direction? Should they let him go just outright in free agency, guys? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. This is Rico Greenhowe, another episode of Bulls Digest. And as usual, go Bulls. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.